The intake scan took about 4 seconds. I stood in the threshold arch of Vethric assessment platform Duer Case 7 while the thing hummed and painted me in whatever frequency they used for biological classification. The arch was taller than it needed to be for me, which was fine. I'm not tall. I waited. The readout went to the tech desk. A Vethric named Sovath Drell ran primary intake. He had the build they all had, dense, plated across the shoulders, like someone had bolted load-bearing panels to a person, neck wider than his skull. He looked at the readout, he looked at me, he looked at the readout again. I have been looked at that way before, in other places, on other platforms. I know the shape of it. He said something to the two techs behind him, not to me. To them, his vocal register sits low, so I felt it in my chest more than I heard it, and the translation lag meant I caught the gist 3 seconds after the smirks. Suboperational load rating. That was the official classification. I know because I asked for the paperwork later, and it was right there in the intake log. Human subject DROS, K, unaugmented biological unit, structural stress tolerance below operational threshold for active assessment floor. Recommended posting, observer tier, safety screen, port side, no active role. I said, fine. I had my coffee thermos. The safety screen had a decent sightline to the floor. I want to be clear about what the Duer Case 7 assessment bay actually is, because it matters later. It's a structural load testing chamber, about 60 meters across and 4 decks high. They run demolition analyses there, structural models, load distribution surveys, resonance mapping for proposed construction and deconstruction projects across the Vethric Compact's outer territories. I was seconded to the team because the human settlements in 3 of those territories have foundation-poor methods. The Vethric modeling suite doesn't have good parameters for, and someone decided I was the cheapest way to get those parameters onto the platform. I'm a structural load analyst, 31 years. I've done foundation surveys in places that didn't have breathable air, and places that were trying to fall down while I was measuring them. I've worked in 11 different gravity profiles. I know what stressed materials sound like. I know what they feel like. The Vethric instruments are excellent. I want to say that clearly, because it's true. Their sensor arrays cover ranges I can only guess at. Their resonance mapping is precise to tolerances that would take me a week to reach with manual equipment. If you ask what a structure is doing in electromagnetic terms, in thermal terms, in high-frequency vibration bands, they will give you numbers 4 decimal places further than you need. They do not register below 40 Hz. Not a flaw in their sensors. A deliberate filter. The Vethric inner ear doesn't respond to infrasound. Their biology tops out around 60 Hz on the low end, and anything below that is outside their perception range entirely. Early in their instrument development, they filtered the sub-40 band as noise. Unactionable signal. Below threshold. I found that out from the technical documentation I'd read before boarding. I mentioned it in my pre-assignment briefing to Sovath Drell and his team. I mentioned it in the context of resonance feedback risk in closed-chamber assessments. Sovath Drell noted it in the briefing log as, human consultant raised non-applicable concern regarding low-frequency band filtering, no action required. I know because I asked for that paperwork too. The first assessment run started at 0800. I sat behind the safety screen with my coffee. They ran a standard load distribution survey on a model of a proposed mining installation, Vethric Compact, outer belt, medium gravity environment, nothing exotic. The instruments hummed, the readouts updated. Sovath Drell and his 2 senior techs walked the active floor, running handheld confirmatory passes on the model anchors. At 0847, I felt something. It started in my sternum, not pain, a low presence, like something leaning against the inside of my ribs from the wrong direction. I sat up straighter. The feeling didn't change. Then it moved into my back teeth, a vibration just below the frequency where vibration becomes sound. The long bones of my forearms registered it next, the way they do when something heavy is running nearby on a shared floor. I checked the main readout panel through the screen. Instruments nominal, all bands green. I pressed the intercom. I said, "There's a sub-40 harmonic building in the bay, probably a feedback loop off the south anchor array. I'd recommend pausing the run and checking the anchor coupling." There was a pause on the other end. Then Sovath Drell's voice, flat. "Instruments are nominal." I said, "I know. This is below your instrument floor." Another pause. Then, observer tier. Thank you. That's not a translation artifact. That's exactly what he said. I sat back. The feeling in my sternum continued. It deepened, very slowly, the way feedback loops do. They build on themselves in small fractions, patient, until they aren't. My teeth were properly aching now. The bones of my forearms had taken on a low hum that I could feel when I rested them on my knees. At 09:03 I pressed the intercom again. I said, it's still building. The south anchor array is going to shed a coupling in the next 10 to 15 minutes, and you'll get a resonance cascade in the chamber. I can feel the frequency climbing. I need you to stop the run and check the physical coupling on anchor 4. Sovath Drell said, human hearing floor is approximately 20 Hz. Chamber instruments are nominal. This concern is noted. I said, it's not about my hearing floor, it's about bone conduction in the 30 to 38 Hz range. I'm not hearing it. I'm feeling it. There was a longer pause this time. I think he repeated it to the other techs. I think that's where the second round of smirks went. He said, we will note the observation. I said, okay. I put down my coffee. I looked at the manual override panel on my side of the safety screen. It's there for a reason. The safety screen is specifically rated for personnel who cannot be on the active floor, but who may need to execute an emergency shutdown if floor personnel are incapacitated or instruments fail to trigger the automated response. It runs on a separate circuit from the instrument suite. It doesn't need an instrument confirmation to execute. It accepts a manual input. I put my hand on the panel cover. I waited. At 09:17 I felt the coupling let go. I can't explain exactly how I felt it. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a sensation I have a clean word for. It was more like a door closing somewhere in my skeleton. A resolution of pressure I hadn't fully registered was there until it wasn't, and then everything climbed very fast. The sternum pressure turned sharp. My back teeth rang. My forearms went from hum to vibration I could actually see if I held them still and watched. I opened the panel cover. I entered the shutdown sequence. I executed it. The bay went to emergency hold in about 2 seconds. The model dropped from the anchor array. The instruments came alive with readings they hadn't shown 30 seconds earlier. The automated response triggered off the sudden load drop, not off the feedback, because the feedback had been invisible to them until it shed the coupling and drove the frequency up into their detection range. 73 seconds, the post-incident review later calculated. That was how far ahead my input was of the first instrument alert. Sovath Drell walked to the safety screen. He stood on the other side of it and looked at me for a moment. He's hard to read. The plating doesn't move the way a face does. But there was something in the stillness of him that I recognized. The shape of a recalibration happening behind someone's eyes. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything either. I picked up my coffee. The post-incident review took 3 days. I was interviewed twice. I provided the technical documentation on sub-40 bone conduction in unaugmented human physiology, which I had, as it happened, already formatted for exactly this kind of conversation. The review board added it to the platform's operational reference library. The Duercos 7 instrument team filed a maintenance correction for the south anchor array coupling. The intake log for human subject DROS, K, was amended, observer tier annotation removed, replaced with load sensing consultant, active operational role, structural resonance advisory function. Sovath Drell sent me a message on the 4th day. It said, the low-frequency documentation has been forwarded to the Compact's 3 other assessment platforms. Thank you for the pre-briefing. I wrote back, no problem. I meant it. The south anchor coupling had been a standard wear issue. They would have caught it eventually on physical inspection. The bay would have been down for repairs for 6 days instead of 4 hours. Not a catastrophe, just a significant operational difference, which is the only kind of difference that shows up in maintenance budgets and nobody argues about. I went back to work the next morning. The instruments were recalibrated. The model was re-anchored. I took my chair behind the safety screen, because that's where the sightlines are good, and the chair is comfortable, and I poured my coffee, and the assessment run proceeded normally, and the instruments read nominal the whole way through. They did, because this time the coupling was tight. I already knew that. I had known it from the doorway.